Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video we are going to make an introduction to the code stages in Blue Prism. We are going to use a code stage to write our very first lines of C#. Our code stage will take in a person's name and output a sentence that contains the name. This is one of the Blue Prism specific videos in this series, so if you are not a Blue Prism developer you can skip to my next videos if you want. Let's create a blank object and name it as lecture 1. In Blue Prism, we use code stages to write and execute our code. As you know, there are two different studios in Blue Prism, namely Object Studio and Process Studio. Code stages are only available in Object Studio. This means that all the coding we are going to do will be in the Object Studio. First thing we are going to do is to go to the Initialize page. In the Properties window, we are going to select the language as C#. We can make this change under the Code Options tab. By default, this is selected as Visual Basic in a newly created object. There are a couple of cool things you can do in these tabs as well, but we are going to come to that in a later video. Then we click OK button and go to our blank action. Let's drag and drop a code stage from the left pane and link it in between start and end stages. Then let's name our code stage as Lecture 1 Code 1. One thing to note here that every code stage within a Blue Prism object must have a unique name. If I try to create a new code stage with the same name, Blue Prism will give me an error. Let's demonstrate this by trying to create a new code stage with the name of an already existing code stage. And there it is. Blue Prism states that I must choose another name for my code stage because there is already a code stage with the same name in my object. Let's go ahead and open our newly created code stage. Notice that there are three tabs in a code stage: Inputs, Outputs, and Code. You can imagine a code stage as a magical box that takes in some inputs, does some things to them, and then gives the results as outputs. It is very similar to creating a new page or an action in Blue Prism. Pages and actions in Blue Prism also have inputs, outputs, and some stuff happens inside those pages or actions that turns inputs into outputs. A code stage does not necessarily have to have inputs or outputs. A code stage can only have inputs or only have outputs or multiple inputs and outputs at the same time. Inputs and outputs could be of any type of data item in your object page, and additionally collections. We can see the list of data types on the right hand side panel. In order to add an input variable, we will click the Add button under the Inputs tab. Then we will give a name to our variable and choose the data type of our variable. One trick here is that when you drag and drop your data item from the right hand side panel to the value field, data type is automatically selected. In the value field, we designate the source of our input variable. This allows our code stage to call that data item with the name we assigned to it at this point. Before we move on, let's talk about naming our variables. Best practice is to use a short, self-explanatory and unambiguous name without any special characters or spaces. Maybe your native language has some special letters, but unfortunately you cannot use those characters when naming the variables. Another rule to follow here is that you cannot start a variable's name with number characters. What do I mean by an unambiguous name is your variable name must be specific enough to explain itself and not too generic within that context. It is difficult to understand the code when names of your variables does not explain themselves. Let's say that you have the sales amount as a variable in your process. Naming a variable as sales amount is not technically wrong, but in your process you may have another type of sales amount in different data items such as cash sales, credit card sales, pending sales, etc. When you are reading your code, you may ask yourself, okay, this variable is named sales amount, but was it cash sales or credit card sales? Does that variable hold the value of online sales or branch sales? In that example, naming our variable as cash branch sales amount instead of sales amount would eliminate the possibility of confusion. Sometimes you start off with a simpler action that concerns, let's say, only branch sales, but later on you are asked to include cash sales additionally in your action. If you name your variable as branch sales from the start, then you will easily include cash sales variable in your code without any confusion. Just like adding a variable, we can remove a variable by clicking the variable and then clicking the remove button. Outputs are pretty similar to inputs in terms of the way we add, remove or name them. Outputs are the result of the execution of your code, and your code stage will set the values of the data items stated as output variables. One thing to take into consideration here is to be careful with the uniqueness of your variable names, whether it is an output or an input. In the code tab, we write our C# code and address the input or output variables. Let's write a simple code stage that takes the name of a person as input and returns the sentence of hello, name of the person, welcome to C#. First we create a data item called name of the person with the type of text and give it the initial value as John. Then let's create a new text data item and name it as sentence result. Let's open our code stage and go to the inputs panel. In order to add an input variable, let's click add button and drag and drop the name of the person data item. As you can see, Blue Prism automatically set the data type as text. Then let's name our input variable as name of person. In order to get the results of our code written to the sentence result data item, we should go into Outputs tab and click the Add button to generate an output variable. Then we drag and drop the sentence result data item into the store in field, and the data type is automatically set to text. Then we name our variable as sentence result. In the Code tab, you can see the inputs and outputs of the code stage in the right hand side panel. This is very informative panel where you see your variables. One rule of the code stage is you must assign a value to every output variable at one point in your code. Let's say your code stage has 3 output variables. If you left one of them unassigned, then code stage will give a syntax error. Let's write a simple one-line code. At this point, don't worry about this code. What we did here is we used the basic method of string variables to create a sentence. We are going to look at the string variables very soon in the upcoming videos. Okay, we wrote our code, and next thing we have to do is to check our code by clicking the check code button. By clicking the check code button, we compile our code. Recent Software Development IDEs does the same thing automatically. Your computer needs to convert your code into a set of instructions called the machine code to be executed, and that's what compiling is. If your code has some errors, Blue Prism compiler will list the errors to you in a window. As a rule, we must click check code button after every edit we make on a code stage, and we must make sure that there are no compile errors. This is the best practice. This is very important because Blue Prism compiles the entire object before you run or debug the object, and there must not be any code stage compile errors. Let's demonstrate this by deliberately creating a syntax error and attempting to debug an action completely irrelevant to our code stage with syntax error. As you can see, deleting the semicolon generates a syntax error on the compiler. Then let's go ahead and create a new test action and see if we can debug it. Notice that this action is not connected to our code stage in any way. When I click the set next stage, you can see the error message that Blue Prism is giving me. The error message is telling me that there is a compile error in one of my code stages. Let's go back to our code stage and fix the syntax error, and once we click the check code button, we can see that there are no compile errors. Now let's see our code in action, so let's click OK and step over our code stage. Our code ran flawlessly, and result is written to the sentence result data item. If I change the name into James and run the code again, sentence result will also change. In the following videos, we will start to learn about the fundamental data types and start to get more into learning C#. Thank you for watching my video. I wish you a pleasant day. See you in the next video.